George Washington, Lee Petty, and Andy Warhol are all on this day. Welcome back to On This Day. Today's date is February 22nd, 2023. It is the 53rd day of the year. You got 312 days left. It is the 8th Wednesday in the 8th week and the 64th day of winter. You got 26 days left until spring. If today's your birthday, you are a Pisces, just like me. Today is National California Day. It's also Ash Wednesday, but we talked about that the last 2 years. This is a day we commemorate the Golden State of the United States of America. It is also the most populous state and the third largest state by area. California has a lot of history, and I don't think most people understand that. I probably understand it more because I went to school in California, and of course we all learn our state's history. From the Native American history to the Mexican era to the Spanish colonization, the gold rush to U.S. statehood, to the hippies and the summer of love, to Hollywood, and to Silicon Valley. All of which is really interesting. California is one of the most beautiful natural states we have. That's another thing that kind of escapes people. They just think of the big cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Diego. They don't appreciate that we have Yosemite, amazing beaches, Sequoia. Death Valley has its own beauty. California got statehood on September 9th, 1850. In the years following statehood, they had the gold rush. Technically, the gold rush started in 1848, but carried on to about 1853. In that amount of time, California grew by 300,000 people. In 1840, the entire state had somewhere around 40,000 people. By 1850, the first census they were involved in, they had 92,000. 1860, they had almost 400,000 residents. 100 years later, in 1960, they had almost 16 million residents. Today, it's about 40 million. All right, let's see what else February 22nd has given us. 1856, the United States Republican Party opens its first national convention in Pittsburgh. 1879, in Utica, New York, Frank Woolworth opens the first of many five-and-dime Woolworth stores. The F.W. Woolworth Company was a powerhouse in American retail for decades. It was huge in its day. It was the Amazon or the Walmart of the early 20th century. It's where everyone went. For many years, the company did strictly 5 and 10 cent business, but in the spring of 1932, they added the 20-cent line of merchandise. Now, to put that in perspective, 20 cents in 1932 is about $5 today. A little bit less. Woolworth continued to grow, and they would serve as anchors for suburban shopping plazas and shopping malls in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. They, of course, got the same complaints that Walmart and Amazon gets. They were too cheap, and it drove local merchants out of business. In the 1960s, the five and dime concept evolved into the larger discount department store format. In 1962, Woolworths founded a chain of large single-floor discount stores called Woolco. Some of those stores were branded as Winfields after the founder's middle name. In that same year, Woolworth's competitors opened similar retail chains that sold merchandise at a discount. There were a handful of stores, but the big ones were Kmart, Walmart, and Target. The following year, in 1963, Woolworth expanded into the shoe store business with the purchase of Kinney Shoes, which would eventually evolve into the store that Woolworth became, Foot Locker. By Woolworth's 100th anniversary in 1979, it had become the largest department store chain in the world. That's according to the Guinness Book of World Records. During the 1980s, they started getting into different things like jewelry, pharmacies called Farmore, Champs Sporting Goods. They had several different types of stores and started expanding aggressively. They wanted like 3 or 4 different types of stores in each of the major malls in the United States, and if one kind of failed, they'd just swap it out with another one of their stores and see if that worked. Eventually, Woolworths, or what it was at this time, aimed to have 10 stores in each of the country's major shopping malls. This growth and expansion contributed to its downfall. The Woolworth Company moved away from the five and dime roots and placed an emphasis on department store chains as it focused on specialty stores. Sadly, Woolworth was unable to keep up with the competition. They tried a few other things, and on July 17, 1997, Woolworth closed its remaining department stores in the U.S. and changed its corporate name to Venator. In 1999, Venator moved from the Woolworths building in New York City to offices on 34th Street. In October of 2001, the company changed its name again, taking the name of its top performer, and became Foot Locker Incorporated. And that was it for Woolworth. I remember shopping at Woolworth. I'm sure most of you listening to this remember Woolworth at some point. It was everywhere in the United States and Great Britain. 1889, President Grover Cleveland signs a bill admitting North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington as U.S. states. 1946, a document known as the Long Telegram, proposing how the United States should deal with the Soviet Union, arrives at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. 1959, Lee Petty wins the first Daytona 500. They just had the Daytona 500 last weekend. He was the father of NASCAR legend Richard Petty, grandfather to Kyle Petty, and great-grandfather to NASCAR racer Adam Petty, who tragically died in 2000. He was doing a practice session at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. His throttle got stuck wide open going into the third turn of the track, causing the car to hit the outside wall virtually head-on, killing Adam instantly. God, I can't believe that. I remember when that happened. It seems like it was just a couple years ago. It's been 23 years. What the hell? Where's my life going? He was only 19 years old. 1994, Aldrich Ames and his wife are charged by the United States Department of Justice for spying for the Soviet Union. Movies released on February 22nd, 2002, Queen of the Damned. This was a pretty good movie. Even though I don't like movies like this, I'm not into scary movies or monster movies. Let me rephrase that. I'm not into the vampires and mummies and all that stuff. I do like a good monster movie with like Godzilla and King Kong, that type. But anyway, this is a vampire movie where a vampire becomes a rock star and plays music that wakes up the queen of all vampires. It is a loose adaptation of the third novel of Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles series, The Queen of the Damned. The film was released 6 months after the star Aaliyah's death, and it was dedicated to her. Aaliyah was a young, she's like, you know, how Rihanna is right now. She's the big thing, the young thing. Well, Aaliyah was that in early 2000s, late 1990s. Sadly, she died in a plane accident, I believe leaving the Bahamas. It was like the plane was overloaded and they crashed at the end of the runway. Born on February 22nd, 1732, George Washington, one of the founding fathers of the United States. He served as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War and then was inaugurated as the first president of the United States on April 30th, 1789. We all know who he was. Very interesting man once you get past the general and the president stuff. He's a very successful man. We all know about George Washington, so I'm not going to get into it. Died on February 22nd, 1987, Andy Warhol. He led a visual art movement known as pop art. He sold a painting titled 8 Elvises for $100 million. He didn't just do paintings. He did hand drawings, photography, silk screenings, sculptures, film, music. He pioneered computer-generated art with his use of early computers. He founded a studio in the 1960s called The Factory. He participated in the 1964 exhibit, The American Supermarket. He was shot by radical feminist writer Valerie Solanas on June 3rd, 1968. He went to surgery and he obviously survived, and she went to prison, and when she got out in 1971, she stalked Warhol and others over telephone and was arrested again in November of 1971. She was institutionalized actually several times and then eventually drifted into obscurity. One more last note on her. She ended up in San Francisco, and on April 25th, 1988, at the age of 52, Valerie Solanas died of pneumonia at the Bristol Hotel in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. Yeah, she was definitely falling on hard times. Andy Warhol died in Manhattan at 6:32 a.m. on February 22nd, 1987, at age 58. According to news reports, he had been making good recovery from gallbladder surgery at the New York hospital before dying in his sleep from a sudden post-operative irregular heartbeat. Oddly enough, most people think he died of AIDS. That is not what Andy Warhol died from. His family did sue the hospital for malpractice, which they quickly settled out of court. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Now go out, have a great day, be nice to each other.